A surprise series of primary season setbacks has delivered a wake-up call to Republican presidential frontrunner Mitt Romney. Why isn't the party unifying around him? You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Lisa Fletcher. His triple victory this week surprised probably everyone but himself, and it's left Rick Santorum with real momentum as the Republican primary race moves closer to Super Tuesday. The former Pennsylvania senator's victories in Colorado, Minnesota, and Missouri have re-energized a campaign that many thought was going nowhere. It also saw him raise $250,000 overnight. And it appears to signal yet another shift in who the right wing of the Republican Party wants to challenge President Barack Obama in November. As for the favorite and frontrunner Mitt Romney, he's now having to re-examine his campaign, which is failing to inspire conservatives. It all points to what could be a drawn-out primary contest as the Republican Party struggles to find a united message. The leading candidates got a chance to hone that message on Friday, as they all addressed an influential conservative gathering in Washington. Let's take a listen to what Romney and first Santorum had to say.
President Obama will have more money, whoever our nominee is. So just think about what it's going to take. It's going to take ideas, vision, contrast, a record of accomplishment that can go up against the failed policies of Barack Obama. That's the winner.
I know that fundamental change this moment demands that we take fresh, bold, conservative leadership with real-world solutions based on real-world experience. I will come to Washington, and with your help and guidance and prayers, I will change Washington. And then I will leave Washington and go back home to my family and my community that I love.
So why is Mitt Romney failing to unite Republicans? With me to discuss this is Karin Agness, a senior fellow from the Independent Women's Forum. Robert Moran, a specialist on polling and public opinion from the market research firm Strategy One. And also in the studio, Allan Lichtman, a political science professor from American University and author of White Protestant Nation, The Rise of the American Conservative Movement. Thanks to all of you for being here.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
So we've got a very energized, passionate Rick Santorum riding the momentum of a three-state sweep. Allan Lichtman, let's start with you. Is Mitt Romney in trouble here?
Mitt Romney has always been in trouble. The Republicans have been desperately in search of an alternative. You know, it's been kind of like waiting for Godot. And they've had so many rise and fall, you know, Bachmann, Perry, Kaine, and now Gingrich. And the latest one is Santorum. And that shows that Mitt Romney has been unable to close the deal, even if he has moved as far to the right as he possibly can. You know, on positions, he has been to the right of Newt Gingrich, even though for a while Newt Gingrich was the darling of conservatives. But Romney has a host of problems with the Republican electorate. Number one, they don't believe him. He can say anything he wants, but they still look at him as a moderate from Massachusetts. Number two, he has foot in mouth disease, gaffe after gaffe after gaffe. You know, I don't care about the very poor, the $10,000 bet, I didn't make much money speaking, it was only $400,000, on and on and on. And finally, nobody but nobody in the Republican Party is willing to walk through a brick wall for Mitt Romney. You may think he's okay, but he lacks the kind of passionate supporters that we've seen conservatives like Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan and even George W. Bush muster.
But is this a case of him just having to be the last one standing? I mean, all of the other challengers have literally fallen by the wayside. Does he just have to wait out Rick Santorum?
Well, I think it's interesting that we're hearing a lot of people really worried about the Republican Party and who's going to be the nominee, as if competition is a bad thing. This competition is going to lead to a better candidate. We saw, for example, the Bain Capital attacks on Mitt Romney and how Newt Gingrich and Perry came out strong. And through that, we saw a lot of pushback. And so Gingrich kind of dropped that argument, and it kind of really helped develop Romney's strength and his argument speaking for privatization and for markets.
But Romney collapsed right after that in three events. How can you say that?
Well, we're having competition. I think Romney's going to get everybody to unite around him. But just remember, it took Hillary Clinton and Obama a while too.
Robert,
they had a tough race.
Is this kind of competition a good thing, or does the longer it play out just provide more artillery to the opposition when the general election rolls around?
Good question. Historically speaking, Republicans have been very concerned about long and drawn out primaries. We've tried to coalesce around a nominee quickly, and our primary process is actually built in order to get a nominee quickly. However, in this case, I will say that I think it actually will make a stronger campaign in the long run. I do think Romney's the front runner, obviously, and I do think he's the likely nominee. And all of this effort up front actually will make him a stronger candidate in the fall. And I think it's good for democracy.
Allan, is there something inherently wrong with Mitt Romney, or is he really facing a unique set of circumstances here that in previous election cycles we haven't seen?
I think he's facing a unique set of circumstances, and that is we saw the implosion of conservatism during the George W. Bush administration, with major conservative thinkers and pundits saying, George Bush, perhaps the most conservative president we've had since Calvin Coolidge, isn't a real conservative. Look, conservatives say they're for fiscal responsibility, states' rights, limited government. Who is the biggest spender and the biggest bureaucracy builder in the history of the country? The most conservative recent president, George W. Bush. That's why Ron Paul has traction, because he's pointing out that the conservative emperor has no clothes. You can't be for fiscal responsibility and balanced budgets and want to cut taxes and not have a progressive tax program. You can't be for limited government and states' rights and want to fight wars around the world, want to have a police force to throw out all the immigrants, want to have a war on drugs. None of this works. You can't be for states' rights and want a right to life amendment and an anti-gay marriage amendment that destroys whatever the individual states wants to do. There is an ideological crisis and ideological contradictions within the Republican Party, which helps explain on a much deeper level than superficial politics why A, Romney has been unable to seal the deal, and B, why so many other candidates have risen and fallen so rapidly.
Karin Agness, is this why Rick Santorum is getting traction, because he pulls in these strong core values of the Republican Party that, as Allan was just saying, have imploded?
Yeah, I think he is really attracting a lot of the people that are the strongest supporters. I think for Romney, he's got some fans of people who are supporting Romney that are Republican voters and think he's the last best alternative. But with Santorum, he's really getting some people excited. And so I think the key for Romney is figuring out how to get those people who are really excited about other candidates into his camp once he wins the number of delegates that he needs to. That's going to be the key.
Well, let's talk about what's ahead, because while Romney and Santorum appear to have the momentum over Gingrich and Paul, that could change as other states get ready to vote. Parts of Maine have quietly held their caucus events this week, but most counties there are set to vote on Saturday. Romney won Maine in 2008 against challenger John McCain, and he's expected to do well there again this time. After a 2-week gap, Michigan and Arizona vote on February 28th. Romney is the favorite to win both of those states, but there is some talk of a challenge from Santorum in Michigan, at least. Whoever wins those states will receive a big boost before Super Tuesday on March the 6th, when 11 states hold primaries or caucuses, including several more conservative-leaning ones.
And remember now, in Virginia, it's just going to be Mitt Romney and Ron Paul, which I think is very interesting because that could have been a race that Santorum, he might have been able to win that state.
But he's not on the ballot.
Right, he's not on the ballot.
Newt Gingrich isn't either.
Right, so that's interesting.
Romney should do well in Michigan and Arizona. The big question, in my opinion, is Super Tuesday, which looks somewhat like a jump ball. I don't think anyone's going to run the tables on Super Tuesday.
I think that's right. And we've seen this movie before. As an historian, I can tell you this. You're way too young to remember this, but as a young conservative, you have to have been steeped in it. Goldwater versus Rockefeller, 1964. You know about that, right?
Yes.
And you had kind of the moderate, in fact, they called moderate Republicans in those days Rockefeller Republicans. You had a moderate Northeastern governor, Nelson Rockefeller, against a staunch movement conservative, Barry Goldwater. The difference between that year and this year, though, was conservatives could unite around Goldwater. He was the only alternative, really, to Rockefeller, whereas this time you've got all of these other conservatives splitting the vote. And Goldwater won in the end by winning the California primary by 1 percentage point. That's how close it was between the moderate and the conservative wings of the Republican Party. So I really think the conservatives have to find their Goldwater, a single candidate to unite around, and soon, if they're going to beat Romney.
Robert, talk a little bit about what happened for this trio of wins for Santorum. Was this an anomaly? I mean, there were a lot of excuses for Romney. It was a cold night, you know, it was snowy, people didn't want to get babysitters, they weren't the hardcore voters. What happened here?
Well, I think the fact is Santorum could be very strong in caucus states where the electorate is relatively small and focused on the real party workers. Keep in mind also that the Romney campaign was focused elsewhere, and Santorum focused quite a bit of his energy on those states and was able to pull it out. It reminds me somewhat of what the president Obama did a couple years, 4 years, or 3.5 years ago, I guess, where he was doing quite well in the caucuses. And, there is a potential for someone like Santorum to do very well in caucuses, in smaller turnout, lower turnout states.
Does that necessarily hold true for Colorado, though? I mean, Romney took Colorado handily in 2008. He did have some substantial money and resource invested in Colorado, yet Santorum still beat him.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a surprise.
Sure was.
Yes, it was a surprise.
I have to tell you, I don't know if you guys are on Mitt Romney's email list, but that morning an email went out saying that McCain had lost a number of primaries and still won the nomination. Missouri's just a beauty contest.
Yeah.
So I think Romney's pollsters must have known that the numbers were not looking good during those 3 primaries.
So talk about, and any of you jump in, talk about what's going on inside the Romney camp right now. Is strategy changing? Is direction changing? Are they deciding to stay the course? I mean, what do you do when you've got a Santorum on your heels? You've still got a Gingrich to deal with these votes in the South coming up in Georgia, his home state. What's the discussion behind the scenes, you think?
I'll give you the 2-second answer, then Karin, who's much more familiar with the Romney campaign than I am, can give you the inside story. The outside story is he's got to do to Santorum what he did to Gingrich. Use that money, that media advantage to savage Santorum and pump up his negatives.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're seeing Romney, whoever's the number 2 candidate, they're going out hard against him, and the ads are really working. So I think we're going to see more negative advertising. And then secondly, I think what we're going to see is more emphasis on the debates. We really saw a change in Romney after Gingrich did so well in the debates. Romney got a new debate coach, new communications team, and really came out hard in the most recent debates. And I think we're going to see more of that side of Romney coming out.
Does Santorum have the ability to throw Romney off his game in the debates?
I don't know.
I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I am.
I mean, I think Romney. Yeah, I mean, I think Romney's actually not a bad debater. No. I think the Romney campaign needs to find a way to solve some of their potential Sunbelt challenges, and they need to find that quickly.
Well, let's talk about how finance is going to play a role in that. If we look at the different amounts of money that each candidate has at their disposal, Mitt Romney's campaign has pulled in more than $57 million just by the end of December. His super PAC, Restore Our Future, spent $18.1 million backing him. With just more than $26 million in donations, Ron Paul has less than half of Romney's fundraising. Super PAC Endorse Liberty has spent $3.4 million supporting him. Now, Newt Gingrich's campaign pulled in nearly $13 million up to the end of December. His Winning Our Future super PAC has given him extra firepower against Romney, spending $8.6 million. And Rick Santorum, he only raised just under $2 million, or actually about $2.2 million, up to the end of December. The Red, White, and Blue Fund has spent the same amount backing his candidacy. So when we're talking about having a financial advantage, clearly Romney has all the cards. How does that play out for him if it's a Romney-Santorum race from here on out? Can Santorum compete?
It matters a lot, very difficult, because, as our expert pollster noted, in the caucus states, you've got tens of thousands of voters. In some of these bigger states, you have hundreds of thousands, millions of voters. You can't do retail politics. You've got to be on the air and on the air constantly, and that's an enormous advantage for Romney over a late-breaking candidate like Santorum.
You know, that's right. I mean, the Romney campaign is built for overtime. Not only do they have the resources, but they also have the organization, and that matters. It's very hard for a Santorum to keep up the pace with a campaign that really is scaled up and ready to roll. And I would look for the Romney campaign to try to land a knockout blow in Ohio, which is a large enough state with more than enough media markets that makes it complicated for any smaller attacker to take on a frontrunner.
You know, now Romney is having to spend money to not only fend off Gingrich, but to fend off Santorum, probably money that he was hoping to save for the general election. Does this put a big dent in his campaign war chest?
The man you see smiling as all this is happening is obviously Barack Obama. His files are now filled with Republicans violating Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not attack another Republican. But Bob is right. A long campaign isn't necessarily a bad thing, as we saw with Obama and Clinton in the Democratic side the last time, as long as you're the challengers. The thing that could be bad for the party is what happened in '64. That is, the party does not coalesce. It does not come together enthusiastically behind the candidate. If that happens, then this election is over. Obama's going to win. He has a lot of advantages anyway, according to my system, the 13 keys to the White House. Obama is favored anyway as a likely re-election prospect. But if you don't have a united Republican Party, it's going to be a blowout like we saw in '64.
Karin Agness, assuming that Romney gets the nomination, how does he pull the party together?
He makes it a race against Obama. Put Obama in the front, in the headlines, attack him for everything that he's promised in 2008 and hasn't delivered by 2012. I mean, we saw a lot of promises in 2008 and a lot of very clear and specific things, like the number of jobs, like improving the economy, things that are very measurable, and he has not produced, and that's what the key's got to be, is focus on that.
How does he overcome what has been perceived as a lack of authenticity? I mean, when Rush Limbaugh talks about Rick Santorum, he says this is a conservative who speaks like a conservative. It comes from his heart. When Mitt Romney talks, it sounds like he's putting on airs. It sounds like it's forced. And Peggy Noonan, she wrote this morning, let me find it here so I can read it for you guys. She said this morning that Romney's campaign is not capable of deepening his meaning, making his stands and statements more textured or more interesting. He comes across like a businessman who studied the data and came up with the formula that will make the deal. And is his lack of, for a better word, authenticity going to be a problem even with Republicans when it comes to a general election?
I guess for me, I don't see that lack of authenticity when he's talking about the economic arguments and how he's built Bain Capital and, you know, fights for free markets. So I think the key for his camp is going to be to keep the discourse and the story on what he's good at talking about and good at being genuine about. If he wants to talk about healthcare, you know, it's a little bit of a struggle for him to relate to a lot of people on that. But when he talks about what he's done for the economy and for jobs, I think he can come across as genuine, and that's what he's got to do.
I think Karin is absolutely right, but in a presidential campaign, you don't get to set the agenda. You know,
but you try to.
You try, but it's not going to work because he's going to go into these debates, and these, you know, wonderful people like Lisa from the media are going to ask him a host of questions on a host of other issues, and he's got to come across as genuine. That is his challenge, and so far, as we've seen from, you know, Santorum, nobody even heard of a few months ago, and all of a sudden he's beating Romney. Even the Republicans aren't buying the authenticity, much less the general electorate. It's going to be tough for him.
Let's listen to what Rick Santorum had to say about the conservatives' role in the Republican Party.
I think we have learned our lesson. And the lesson we've learned is that we will no longer abandon and apologize for the policies and principles that made this country great for a hollow victory in November. The other thing we should recognize, as conservatives and Tea Party folks, that we are not just wings of the Republican Party, we are the Republican Party.
Robert Moran, is that true? What do the polls tell you in terms of the leanings of the Republican Party right now?
Well, to Allan's earlier point, the Republican Party has always had a number of fractures within it. And these are just more apparent now because of where the economy is, because of some hangover from the Bush years, and because of the pressure from the Obama administration, which most rank-and-file Republicans see as sort of an existential threat to sort of the middle America, middle-class sort of conservative Republican ideology. And none of these fractures that we're seeing now are much different from what we've seen in the past. There's the socially moderate to socially conservative fracture. There's the business elite versus sort of the Main Street elite throughout America. And so I'm not sure that this is any different than any other year. It's just that these the stress on the Republican Party and the stress on those fissures is far more extreme than in any other time that I can recall. Now, a good point to make here is once a nominee is decided upon, I do agree that the Republican base will get behind that nominee. They may not work overtime for that nominee, but I could certainly tell you who they'll work overtime against, and that is the current president of the United States.
But do you want to have your candidate limping into the general election?
No, ideally you'd have someone who would be inspiring, just like President Obama was, or Senator Obama at the time was in 2008.
Let's talk about that word, because when I watch Mitt Romney, it feels sometimes as though he lacks that inspirational element that gets the crowd really going, gets them really riled up. Is that just my perception of watching these, or do any of the three of you ever notice that as something that may be missing from his integral message?
It is missing, and you can't invent it at this point. You are who you are. This is who Mitt Romney is. We're seeing the real Mitt Romney, and that is not going to change. And you can try to change yourself, and you only make a mess. I also want to comment briefly on what Rick Santorum said. I think Rick Santorum was essentially correct in talking about the heart of the Republican Party. And I don't have a candidate in this race, but my advice to any voter is forget electability. You have no idea who's electable and isn't. The Democrats went for John Kerry in 2004 because they thought he was electable, and he was a terrible candidate. So forget electability. It's a word we should banish from the English language, and vote for who you believe in.
Robert, what happens when people do that?
Well, historically speaking, electability has not been a primary concern of Republican primary voters. Historically speaking, Republican primary voters have gone for the person who they believe would most represent their values in Congress or in the White House. And traditionally, electability arguments are not very good. I can tell you, as a pollster working for a number of different Republican candidates in the past, we've tested electability style messaging, and it doesn't tend to work very well. It certainly doesn't send the heart pattering. I can say, though, that the primary issue in this election is likely to be the economy. It's hard to see that it won't be. And I would turn around some of the discussion we're having here and say that, Mitt Romney, as a business person who is passionate and is very competent when he's speaking on business-related topics, could turn that to his advantage. After all, he could essentially challenge all the other candidates by asking them if they actually know how to read a balance sheet. I doubt they can.
I remind you, the last businessman president, you know who it was, Robert? Herbert Hoover, who presided over the worst economic times in the history of the country. So I'm not sure that's a great argument.
But the data clearly shows that the American voter is focused like a laser on the economy. And while it is true that the month-to-month job numbers appear to be coming back, and that certainly loads in Obama's favor, if you look at the polling data, people aren't necessarily feeling that the economy is improving for them, for their neighbors yet. And the question is, will the actual data turn will the perception of the economy improving turn out in time to help the president? This is something that George Bush had a challenge with in 1992.
I agree with that. Here's an interesting thing, though.
You've got 10 seconds to tell me.
It's bad for Obama. that everything is turning on the economy, but that's great for Obama because it means they don't have anything else on him. Whatever happened to the national security argument that Republicans thought they were going to beat Obama over the head with? It's gone. Republicans are gambling everything that the economy is going to be terrible, and that's one heck of a gamble.
All right, thanks to all of you for a lively discussion. We appreciate you joining us, and that is it from the Inside Story team in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you, as always. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at InsideStory@aljazeera.net.